Hello, this is Sheila Bender, and you are listening to In Conversation, discussions on writing and the writing life. Today we have with us by telephone Leesa Renee Hall, speaking to us from Toronto. She's an author, facilitator, social historian, and creative word artist. After writing 500,000 words over 365 consecutive days, Leesa helps spiritual leaders use the art of self-inquiry to question their internal programming so they create truly inclusive communities, companies, and corporations. Leesa is on the advisory committee for Awarepreneurs, and her tips have been featured in American Express Open, Globe and Mail, and Inc., along with television, radio, and podcast appearances. Welcome to our program, Leesa.
Hi, Sheila. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to have learned about your work, which I learned about from my daughter through Facebook. I just so appreciate your acceptance of the invitation to talk with us here in Washington State. There's so much I could ask you. I hardly know where to start, but why don't we start? Why don't we start with your expressive writing prompts, which do appear on your website, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's your name, Leesa, Leesa, Renee, Renee, Hall.com. Correct? Okay.
That is, yes.
Good.
And listeners can go there. If you want an easier URL, you can go to nomorewhitefragility.com.
Thank
you.
And
it'll take you right to the post with all the expressive writing.
Great. And they are really, really very rich writing prompts aimed at helping people write about painful topics, of which one is, in our culture, race, relationships, and understanding. So maybe we should start there with maybe the history of how you began to do this work.
Yeah. My background was in tech, and since writing and focusing on writing, I've started to identify that, I am a writer. So I'm actually moving away and out of tech as my primary career. And how I got to this point is on January 3rd, I woke up at 4:30 a.m. and I said, I'm going to write my first work of fiction. And the reason why I got up that early was because I just knew that was the time of the day that I would be the most creative and the time of day I'd have the most control over. So on January 3rd, I woke up at 4:30 a.m. and, oh boy, I pulled myself out of bed, Sheila. And being in Toronto at that time of year, the sun doesn't come up for another 3 hours.
Oh, that's a long time.
So it was tough. But for the first 59 days of the year, including weekends, I got up at 4:30 a.m. and I wrote a chapter for my first work of fiction. But then on the 60th morning, I got up and I had a professional setback. And it was weighing on my heart. So I said, well, let me write about it. Let me write about these emotions that are coming up for me. I've been writing about the emotions of all these characters. I can definitely write the emotions that are my own. And so on the 60th morning, I did that. I felt a little bit better. Then in the next day, I did that again. And then I did it again. And pretty soon, I started writing my own words around my own feelings, around past memories, around current memories, around the future, and so on. So little did I know that the purpose of me getting up that early in the morning wasn't to write about other characters. It was to become more familiar with the character of me. And then I started to write to heal, and then it moved into writing as activism. And then 365 consecutive days later, I celebrated passing the 500,000 word mark.
Wow. What happened to this story? Did you continue working on the fiction?
I didn't. And I said to myself, I'm going to get back to it next year. So next year is this year, and it's still sitting there because of all these rich memories that popped up for me. And as they started to emerge, I started to share them more widely and started getting people asking, well, wow, look at what you've been able to uncover about yourself. Is there any way you can help me? And that's where these expressive writing prompts come from. These are the questions I ask myself as I question my internal programming, my internal oppression. And now I use those questions and share them with other individuals who want to use questions to ask themselves around their toxic beliefs and internal programming.
So do you find the people are as easily involved in answering the questions as you were, or is it harder?
I've received messages where people fight with me and argue, and it's like, well, I don't believe I need to answer this question, because usually I'll put together 3 or 4 questions on a specific topic. Mm-hmm. So, for example, one of the writing prompts I put together was called Deconstructing Your Privilege. And so whether you're white, black, or any other ethnic background, you'll find that there are privileges that you hold that go beyond skin color and gender. So I had one of my clients question me. I don't have any privilege. I am an indigenous woman. I have no privilege. And so there was a back and forth going between us. There was also a white man, one of my clients, who also challenged me and said, that, no, there's no privileges I have. I mean, yes, I have skin color privilege, but that's about it. And so sometimes people will question, and I know that that questioning of the questions mm-hmm. has more to do with an avoidance in going deep.
Absolutely.
Because on this side of the world and in our culture, we're so afraid of the dark. Mm-hmm. We're so afraid of the dark emotions. We're so afraid of going deep into the shadow and finding out what's deep down within us. But it's when we mind for what I call gloomy gold that we will be enriched.
I love that phrase, gloomy gold. I know as a writer that it's when we have resistance that it's an area we need to examine. I mean, that's the first hint that there's something there, because if it wasn't there, we wouldn't resist it. And the word privilege, maybe we don't understand that word. Maybe you have some thoughts on that too. Maybe we immediately give it a negative connotation that makes us resist it. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. And privilege is any sort of advantage you hold over someone else. Mm-hmm. So even in our household, a parent will hold a privilege over a child due to their age and so on, and their authority. A teacher will hold privilege over a child. And within our society, there are different privileges that we all hold. So we will say that because white men hold privileges, then they should have all the power. And that's the way our culture is structured. Someone may look at me, Sheila, and say, well, Leesa, she is a black female. She doesn't have any privileges. But I do, because I live in a country where I'm fluent and my mother tongue is the official language of the country I was born in and I live in. My privilege is that I practiced a religion, the dominant religion, and I'm a heterosexual female. So these are privileges that I bring to the table. A white man may say, well, my gender and my skin color give me privilege, but I am poor. So that's actually a marginalized identity or disadvantage. Maybe he is white and male, but he's also gay. Again, that's another marginalized identity. When we add up all our identities, unless we're looking at the full scope of who we are, we may not see what our privileges are.
So tell me a little bit about the questions you ask the person to write from in order to examine privilege and what happens.
So one of the things I do is I bring the person to the 9 writing prompts that I have on that blog post at nomorewhitefragility.com. And there are 9 writing prompts right there, because I actually, it was interesting because I developed those questions after having a back and forth with a white man from England. And he was complaining with a friend of mine, and they were going back and forth because he was saying, I'm a poor white guy, nobody likes me. I feel like singing right now. But that's exactly what he said. He said, I'm a poor white man, nobody likes me. And so my friend, who was also a white male, tried to commiserate with him and tried to encourage him. But then he would come back and say, I reject your liberal American politics. So it's just weird, right? On the one hand, he's saying, these are my marginalized identities, and now he's trying to regain his racial superiority by saying, I reject what you're saying to me. So I offered him these 9 writing prompts, and I said, work through these. I've done the same. And I found that it gave me clarity. And he said, I reject your writing prompts. So I don't want your writing prompts. So I sat there, Sheila, and I said, well, I diligently put these things together. So let me put this in a blog post. So one of the questions is, what is your earliest memory around skin color? Where were you? Who were you with? Was it something a family member said? Was it an event and your friends participated in? How did you feel? Mm-hmm. often we don't think about that.
Right. We don't go back that far.
We don't.
So did this man ultimately accept your writing prompts or left it that way?
He did not. But
did not.
what the good news is that others have.
Good. Very good news.
So one of the most cherished feedback that I got was from a woman who sent me an email, and she said that she and her husband came across the writing prompts. And she was happy that they did so because her daughter just had a daughter, and that was their first grandchild. And her grandchild is mixed race. And so she was thankful to me for coming up with the writing prompts because she said she and her husband are working through them so that they can become better grandparents to their new granddaughter.
That must have felt so good to find that your work is effective in that way.
I've heard from people who've used the writing prompts at conferences. A white woman emailed me and said, we've used this in our coaching mastermind group because as coaches, we want to be better to our clients, no matter their skin color. And we want to make sure that the door is open for people of color and Indigenous people who may feel that they're not welcome in our space.
Do you have any examples of your own or somebody else's writing from these prompts that you might read?
I don't.
Okay.
And the only reason being is because what I usually say is that I want to hear what you've discovered as a result of your writing, but I don't want to see exactly what you wrote.
Oh, so can you share with us some of the discoveries?
Yes, I can do that. I remember one of my clients, a white man who actually lives on the West Coast. Hopefully I'm not identifying him too much.
Oh, it's a pretty big coast.
He had worked through one of the writing prompts where he was wondering what his marginalized identities were. And he said to me, I am a straight white man, married, I'm pretty comfortable financially. And he then said that while he sat with some of those questions, he then identified that one of the things that is a marginalized identity or disadvantage is that he comes from a family lineage of broken homes, broken families.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a generational issue of multiple marriages, multiple partners. And he sat with that for a while. He said, this was something that wasn't clear to him until he went through the writing prompt. And so, the resolution, I don't know what that is because he didn't share that, but it was just seeing that awareness come up for him, that the pattern he's been repeating is a pattern that exists within his ancestral bloodline. That back to his grandfather and great-grandfather, the brokenness that comes with divorce and then remarriage and not resolving. We're not talking about conscious uncoupling here. We're talking about some really dark, deep emotions that were unresolved because of divorces and so on. So he was very thankful for having the prompt to help him identify that.
I think that ties into what you said about how in our culture we don't even know how to address the darker emotions, that it's almost like it's not okay to have them. And then when you write in this expressive way to the writing prompts, you can't avoid them anymore. And growth happens, which must be very, very satisfying to know you put that out into the world and you can see the effects of your thinking and your work.
You are listening to KPTZ 91.9 FM, Port Townsend. In case you just joined us, you are listening to In Conversation with Sheila Bender, discussions on writing and the writing life. Sheila is talking with Toronto writer Leesa Renee Hall about the way teaching expressive writing prompts can help us communicate about sensitive topics.
I did print out from your website the writing prompts for white fragility and spiritual bypass. And I think at this point, it might be interesting for you to address the key phrases that people use when they are not doing the expressive writing, when they're doing the opposite, because these prompts that you've come up with are to help us examine core beliefs that if we don't examine, otherwise we are using these key phrases that perpetuate the opposite of what you're working toward. So maybe you could address some of that.
Yes. Oh, Sheila. Oh, it's so funny because I dealt with this just this morning, seeing some of these key phrases. And so as I put together this blog post with the writing prompts, I wanted exactly what you've done. I wanted to point out some of the things that are being said as to why the finger is being pointed and said, hey, that's white fragility, that's white privilege, that's spiritual bypassing. So I collected these phrases directly from people's posts.
Uh-huh.
I didn't have to do much research for this. I just copied and pasted from what I saw and from screenshots I've had. So.
Uh-huh. I know they're on your website, but if you could read some of them, it would be wonderful.
Absolutely. So white fragility, some phrases around white fragility, and I'll define what it means. This comes from white fragility is defined as a way to withdraw, defend, argue, minimize, and push back to regain their racial position. And so some of the key phrases are, stop speaking down to me. If you say it in a less angry tone, I'll listen. It seems to be a sin for white people to complain at all. Not all white people. Yeah, that's a sign of white fragility. Stop attacking me. Let's wait for the facts. It was just a joke. All right, so those are some phrases. Now, in terms of spiritual bypassing or spiritual bypass, and what spiritual bypassing is, it's a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues. So some things that people will say, some will recognize as spiritual bypassing is, let love and light. Stand in self-love. Focus on what you want and the universe will give it to you. Just pray about it and let God do the rest. So those are some key phrases.
Yeah, those are phrases I have heard. Driving to the studio this morning, thinking about our conversation, I wonder what you would think about this one. I'm not a very political person. I will hear people say.
My favorite.
Yeah.
That is. Another one is, I don't see skin color.
Right, I'm blind.
That's another one. I'm blind.
Yeah. So the connection then between those kind of phrases that people use when they're defending and blocking true interconnection, you're writing prompts that will help people examine the source of their own dark emotions surrounding race or other kinds of privilege or lack of privilege. Can you express for us how the connection might work? How the man, for instance, who understood now about the broken families and the marriages and remarriages and the unresolved issues from the many generations before him, how will that, do you think, work to help him open up to sincere and real conversation between people?
I know from my perspective, one of the things that I was afraid of was having those hard conversations. And so as soon as the anger would show up, the sadness, I would do whatever I can to escape the emotion I'm witnessing. Mm-hmm. And if I'm always trying to escape, then I never resolve what's supposed to be resolved. Mm-hmm. So now I can stand with someone's anger and hear what they're trying to express. I can use curious inquiry to question and ask questions. And in terms of my client, the white male who identified this generational issue around harmful divorce, it means that he shows up in his current marriage understanding that there are triggers he has to watch out for, triggers that will cause him to take the easy route out or the easy path out. So if he wants to break that generational pattern and ensure that his son or his daughter or his child does not repeat this generational pattern, now he's aware that this is what exists, this is what's been passed on, and now he can make a choice between replicating that same dark pattern or doing something different. Mm-hmm.
I'm a true believer that writing makes a difference, and I'm so happy to hear you talk about the difference it can make in a person's life, even if that person is the only audience to the writing. I mean, you say you don't ask those people to share it with you, but they have written it, they have read it, and it makes a difference. You did use a term that's new in our discussion, curious inquiry. So explain that a little bit and how that goes along with the work of writing from the prompts.
I didn't know that curious inquiry was even a thing. I had no idea. And in fact, it was a very long time ago that I used the art of curious inquiry to change someone's behavior without them knowing that that's what I was trying to do. Mm-hmm. I was 17 years old. I was playing the organ at my mother's church. And in fact, I didn't know how to play the organ. I knew how to play the piano, but not the organ. but the church needed someone to play something.
Uh-huh.
And the only instrument they had in the church was this organ. So I pretty much taught myself what to do. And the organ, you know, there's 4 or 5 manuals, and then there's the foot pedals. Like, what am I doing here? Well, every day after I finished playing, a man would come up to me and tell me how terrible I sounded.
Oops.
That I needed lessons. And it got to the point, Sheila, where my mother would drive into the parking lot of the church, and my stomach, I started feeling this, Remember, I'm 17 years old, and this guy comes up to me yet again in the service. I had every right to shout at him, maybe push him, which I wouldn't have done, but I had every right. But when he came up to me and criticized me yet again, I stood up from the organ, I pointed to the seat, and I looked at him and I said, "Can you show me what to do?" He looked at me, he looked at the bench, he turned and walked away, and he never bothered me again.
Wow. So that's the beginning of you understanding something that you call curious inquiry.
Yes, which is simply asking meaningful questions to get meaningful answers. And so while I went through tech, I had a career in tech, and I was a freelance journalist when I graduated from university. I went to technology, and now I'm back to writing. The thread that ties it all together is that I use curious inquiry to get at the truth. And so it's not an accident today that I use questions, that's what curious inquiry is. It's using questions to get at the truth, whether it's my own truth or someone else's truth.
Right. We have to ask questions that we do not know the answers to in order to make the inquiry. And I think that's another stumbling block for people. They don't like not knowing. And yet it's only in examining what we don't know yet, when writing is a powerful tool for that, that we grow and we learn. Again, I have to applaud your work, and I applaud everyone who's connecting with your work, because it means they're willing to use writing as a tool to discover and to gain insight and to change.
And Sheila, let me just add that in this day and age where we have the proliferation of fake news, fake profiles, information that's influencing how we vote and what we think, curious inquiry interrupts that. It helps us to ask questions to find out if what we're viewing, what we're witnessing is actually true. So developing this skill is not only important to writing, but it's important to how we interact with the world around us. If we can get back to curious inquiry and using questions, then we won't be fooled again. That's another song title. We won't be fooled again.
I like it. It's hard, though. It's hard enough when you're examining yourself, and it's really hard when you feel you're in one-to-one contact with somebody who's resisting. So I think what you're saying is the questions, if they're meaningful, break down that resistance. And yet that man walked away, the one who was criticizing your organ playing, so you never got to find out more or hear the rest of, or see any change in him. And that's difficult not to be able to continue the conversation.
It can be. And it could be, and the way I look at it is that I've set up my boundary. And my boundary is this. It's unless you can engage with me in a conversation, unless you can interrupt your own pattern and stay with me in conversation as I ask you questions, then let's not have that conversation. I can't change everyone. There's some people like this gentleman from the UK who rejected my questions. You know, I can't reach everyone, nor do I want to. Instead, I want to work with those who are really serious about using questions to change their patterns.
So a way to also, I think, interpret that is when we're writing from your prompts ourselves. If we have too much resistance to one question, do you think it's okay to just turn to a different question from your prompts and then return to the one that we resisted?
Yes.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
And I've done this myself.
Because sometimes writing will stop if there's too much resistance, and that's unfortunate, because the more we can let ourselves go with writing, the more we can face resistance the next time, because we know we got through it. I'm glad to hear so. Even you have had trouble with your own questions.
And I've also had trouble with my own writing. I remember during my 365-day quest, I decided to write my experience working in technology for 15 years, and that became my first memoir. And I came across a memory that it was hurtful back then, and 10 years later, writing about it, it was hurtful again. Mm-hmm. I called up all the Twitter tweets and the emails that I got around that particular memory, and I reread everything, and it just made the pain deeper. Mm-hmm. I tried to write through that pain, and I couldn't.
And so?
So it took another month. A month went by. I wrote other chapters. I wrote about other memories. But it was a month later that I was ready to go back to that memory and write through it. Mm-hmm. And when I did, I was ready, and I got it done.
So when you say your first memoir, what was the title of that one?
The working title is Operation Bulldoze.
Okay. And the title of the second one?
The title of my second one was "There's No Better Way to Get to 500,000 Words Than to Write About my journey of writing 500,000 words." So that one, or the working title is "Embracing Winter."
I know we're going to have to end soon, and I just want to thank you again for being persistent and brave and educating people on how to use expressive writing and curious inquiry as tools to really connect and to really help ourselves and others examine, have the examined life rather than just accept, not being sort of automatically whoever we have been shaped to be. It's exciting work, and it's just exciting to me as a writer that you're writing using writing with other people to help them do this work. And it's very private work, really, but it sounds like the fact that it's infiltrating groups like Mastermind and different organizations, it's becoming more public work, which I think is so wonderful and valuable. So I just want to thank you so much for not only being here with us today, but for doing this and continuing to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila.
In Conversation is produced by Sheila Bender and edited by Charlie Fleischman.